A notification popped up on my tablet at 7:52 in the evening. It read dinner with my only love, 8 p.m., Bellemare. I was sitting alone in bed in a flannel shirt with a heating pad on my lower back, 3 days into a head cold, watching a rerun of a cooking show I did not care about, because my husband had told me that morning he was flying to Raleigh for an emergency vendor meeting and would not be home for our 15th wedding anniversary. I stared at the screen for 11 full seconds before my body understood what my mind already knew. I was not in Raleigh with him. I was not anywhere near Bellemare. I was in my own bed in Asheville, North Carolina, exactly where he had left me that morning, with a kiss on the forehead and a suitcase rolling behind him. I got up, changed out of my flannel shirt into the first clean thing I found in my closet, grabbed my keys, and drove 19 minutes across town with my hands shaking so hard on the steering wheel that I nearly ran a red light on Merriman Avenue. I walked into Bellemare at 8:41, past the hostess stand, past a table of businessmen who barely glanced up, straight to the corner table by the window where my husband of 15 years was leaning across a candle toward a woman who was not me, holding her hand in both of his. And what I saw next made me understand that the man I had built an entire life with had been living a second one right beside it. My name is Ren Delacroix Ashby, and I need to go back further than that dinner table, because betrayal never actually starts the night you catch it. It starts years earlier, quietly, in places you are not looking. I was 39 years old that spring, a partner at a boutique architecture firm I had helped build from 4 employees to 41, and I had been married to Foster Ashby for 15 years. We met at a housewarming party in Raleigh when I was 22 and he was 24, both of us broke, both of us ambitious, both of us convinced we were going to become something. Foster was charming in that effortless Southern way, the kind of man who remembered the names of waitstaff and made your grandmother laugh within 5 minutes of meeting her. I fell for him the way you fall down a staircase, fast, without deciding to, and by the time I hit the bottom, I had already agreed to marry him. We built our life together in Asheville. He started a boutique investment consulting firm called Ashby Meridian Partners, and I helped him with the initial capital, because my mother had left me a modest inheritance when she passed, and Foster had nothing but a business degree and a talent for talking people into believing in him. I put in $60,000 that year, money my mother had spent 22 years saving from a nursing job, and in exchange, I became a silent founding partner with 49% ownership of Ashby Meridian, structured that way on the advice of my father, who never fully trusted Foster's charm and wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened, I would not be left with nothing. Foster protested at the time. He said it made him feel like he needed a chaperone in his own company. I told him it was not about trust, it was about protecting a family investment, and eventually he signed the papers, because back then he loved me more than he loved his own pride. For the first several years, Ashby Meridian was small. 4 employees crammed into a rented office above a bakery on Lexington Avenue, and Foster and I still ate dinner together most nights, still argued about paint colors, still fell asleep with his hand resting on my hip like it belonged there. But businesses have a way of consuming the people who build them, and somewhere around year 8, Foster started closing bigger deals, courting wealthier clients, appearing on a regional business podcast that made him locally famous in a way that felt both thrilling and, in hindsight, corrosive. He hired a young associate named Simone Rourke in year 9, fresh out of a finance program at Wake Forest, sharp, quick with numbers, and unfailingly polite whenever she came to our house for the holiday parties I insisted on hosting every December. I liked her, actually. I remember telling Foster once that Simone reminded me of myself at that age, hungry and precise. He had laughed and said, "She's good, but she's not you." I believed him. That is the strange cruelty of hindsight. How many small warnings you can replay and realize you translated every single one of them into reassurance instead of alarm. By year 12 of our marriage, Foster had stopped introducing me as his wife at industry events unless someone specifically asked. He said it was easier that way, that clients respected the firm more when they thought of him as a singular visionary rather than a married man running a family business, and I told myself that was reasonable, that some men needed the myth of self-made success the way other men needed morning coffee. I stay. D in the background by choice, or so I believed at the time, focusing on my own firm, letting Foster be the face of Ashby Meridian while I quietly remained the financial backbone that kept 49% of the company safely under my name. What I did not know, what I would not learn until the worst week of my life, was that somewhere in those years, the quiet arrangement I believed protected me had slowly become something Foster resented so deeply that he started looking for ways around it. The morning of our 15th anniversary, Foster kissed my forehead and told me the Raleigh trip was unavoidable, an emergency call from a client threatening to pull $11 million from a fund unless he personally flew out to reassure them. I told him I understood, even though something in my chest ached at the idea of spending our anniversary alone with a head cold and a heating pad. He promised we would celebrate properly the following weekend, dinner at the restaurant where he proposed, the whole production. I believed him completely, because after 15 years, believing him had become as automatic as breathing. That was the last morning I believed anything Foster told me without first needing proof. The notification appeared on my tablet because 2 years earlier, at Foster's insistence, we had linked our digital calendars across every device in the house, part of what he called running our life like a well-oiled machine. He wanted shared visibility into scheduling, since our lives had become a tangle of client dinners, architecture site visits, and social obligations that needed coordinating. I had set it up myself on a Sunday afternoon, both of us laughing about how unromantic it was to schedule date nights like board meetings. Foster had apparently forgotten, in the specific chaos of planning whatever this dinner actually was, that any event he created on his phone would sync instantly to mine. He must have typed the reservation, note the way you type something private and disposable, never imagining his wife would see it lighting up her screen from 30 miles away. I sat in my car outside Bellemare for 4 minutes before going in, not because I was frightened, but because some animal part of my brain needed to prepare itself for whatever I was about to see. I walked through the door in jeans and a wrinkled cardigan, no makeup, hair still damp from the shower I had rushed through, and I felt every eye in that elegant dining room land on me as if they somehow already knew I did not belong in a restaurant this polished on this particular night. I found their table by the window in under 10 seconds. Foster was leaning across a lit candle, holding Simone Rourke's hand in both of his, and as I got closer I heard him say, in the same warm voice he used to use with me at the beginning of everything, "You are the only person who has ever actually seen me." Simone was smiling at him with an expression I recognized instantly, because I remembered wearing it myself, 17 years earlier, at a housewarming party in Raleigh. I did not scream. I did not throw a glass of wine, though I thought about it. I walked directly to the table and said, quite calmly, "Happy anniversary, Foster." His face did something I had never seen it do before, a full and total collapse of every practiced expression he had spent 2 decades perfecting. Simone yanked her hand back so fast she knocked over a water glass. "Ren," Foster said, standing so quickly his chair nearly toppled, "this isn't, I can explain, this is a client dinner. We were discussing the Hargrove account." I looked at the candle between them, at the single rose in a bud vase, at the way Simone would not meet my eyes, and I said, "You do not hold a client's hand while telling her she's the only person who has ever seen you, Foster. I heard you from 6 feet away." The restaurant had gone quiet around us in that particular way restaurants do when they sense a scene unfolding and everyone pretends to study their menus while listening to every word. Foster reached for my arm and I stepped back before he could touch me. "Please," he said, his voice dropping low, "not here, let's talk about this at home." I looked at him for a long moment, at the man I had loved since I was 22 years old, and I said the only thing that felt true in that moment. "There is no home to talk in tonight, Foster. There is only the truth, and you just handed it to me for free." I turned and walked out of Bellemare with my chin level and my hands steady, though my heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I made it to my car before the shaking started, and I sat there in the dark parking lot with the engine off, staring at the restaurant's glowing windows, watching 2 small figures inside stand frozen at a table neither of them seemed to know how to leave. My phone buzzed, a text from Foster. "Please come home so we can talk like adults." I did not respond. Instead, I did something that surprised even me, something cold and clear-headed that felt less like a decision and more like a program executing itself after years of quietly running in the background of my mind. I called my lawyer. "Delacroix Ren Delacroix Ashby, I want to explain something about my maiden name before I continue, because it matters to what happened next. My mother's family had run a small but respected regional law practice in Asheville for 2 generations, Delacroix and Voss, and my cousin Adair Delacroix had taken over as managing partner 5 years earlier. Adair had drafted every piece of paperwork surrounding my 49% ownership of Ashby Meridian Partners, and Adair had warned me, gently but repeatedly over the years, that Foster's growing habit of describing himself publicly as the sole founder was not just an ego problem but a legal one, the kind of pattern that sometimes preceded exactly the sort of overreach I was about to discover. I called Adair from the Bellemare parking lot at 9:14 p.m. She picked up on the second ring, because family calls late on a Friday night rarely mean good news, and she was right. "Adair," I said, my voice remarkably level, "I need you to look into something for me, tonight if you can." I told her everything, the linked calendar notification, the restaurant, Simone Rourke's hand in Foster's, the phrase, "the only person who has ever seen me." Adair was silent for a moment before she said, "Ren, I need to tell you something I probably should have told you sooner. 6 weeks ago, our office received a routine request from Ashby Meridian's outside counsel, asking about the process for converting minority shareholder agreements in privately held firms, specifically around forced buyouts triggered by shareholder inactivity clauses. I didn't think much of it at the time because it came through as a generic inquiry, not tied to your name, but given what you just told me, I think we need to pull the actual language of your original ownership agreement first thing tomorrow morning." The cold feeling that had started in my chest at Bellemare spread through my entire body. "Are you saying he's been trying to find a way to push me out of my own company?" I asked. Adair's answer was careful, measured, exactly the way a good lawyer answers a question she is not yet certain of. "I'm saying we need to look at the documents very closely, and I think you should not go home tonight without your original signed copies in hand." I drove home with my headlights cutting through the dark mountain roads outside Asheville, and when I pulled into our driveway, I did something I had never done in 15 years of marriage. I went straight to the fireproof safe in our bedroom closet, entered the combination with fingers that had gone strangely steady, and pulled out the folder containing my original shareholder agreement, my father's handwritten notes from the year the company was founded, and every amendment we had signed since. I photographed every page with my phone and emailed the images to Adair before I even took off my coat. Then I sat on the edge of our bed, in the house Foster and I had bought together 11 years earlier, and I waited. He came home at 11:40 that night, smelling faintly of the restaurant's candle smoke and something floral I did not recognize as my own perfume. He stood in the bedroom doorway for a long moment before speaking. "Ren, I am so sorry you found out this way." I looked up at him and felt something inside me that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but some third thing I had no name for. "This way," I repeated. "Is there a way you had planned for me to find out that would have been better, Foster? Were you going to tell me eventually, or was Simone simply supposed to remain my husband's only love indefinitely while I stayed home with a head cold?" His jaw tightened. "It's not what you think. It happened slowly. I never meant for it to become what it became." "How long?" I asked, and my voice cracked slightly on the second word, the only moment all night my composure genuinely slipped. He looked at the floor. "A little over 2 years. 2 years. 24 months of holiday parties where I had complimented Simone's work ethic, 24 months of late nights I had excused as the cost of ambition, 24 months during which my husband had been building a second life 6 inches away from the one we shared." "I spoke to Adair tonight," I said, watching his face carefully. Something flickered behind his eyes, fast gone before I could fully name it, but I recognized it because I had seen that exact expression on his face during difficult client negotiations, the look of a man recalculating his approach in real time. "About the divorce," he said quickly. "Of course, that makes sense. We should get everything handled properly." "About the shareholder inquiry your outside counsel made 6 weeks ago," I sighed. And watched him go very, very still. For a long moment, Foster said nothing at all, and in that silence I understood, with total clarity, that this was not simply a story about infidelity. This was a story about a man who had spent 2 years falling in love with someone else while simultaneously building a legal exit ramp around his own wife's ownership of the company she had helped finance into existence. "Ren," he finally said, "it's not what you're imagining." Then tell me what it is, I said, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were planning to take Ashby Meridian the same way you were planning to take Simone to dinner on our anniversary, quietly, and without telling me until it was already done. He did not deny it. That silence told me more than any confession could have. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the guest room, since I could not bring myself to share our bed with him, and I made a list on a legal pad of everything I needed to do before the sun came up: freeze our joint accounts, request a forensic review of Ashby Meridian's recent legal correspondence, and call Adair back the moment her office opened. Foster knocked on the guest room door twice during the night. I did not answer either time. At 8 a.m., Adair called. "Ren," she said, "I stayed up reading through everything you sent me, and I need you to come into the office this morning. There's something in the amendment language from 3 years ago that I think Foster's team altered without your full understanding of what you were signing." My stomach dropped. 3 years earlier, Foster had asked me to sign what he described as a routine tax restructuring document, something about converting a portion of the company's ownership structure into a different class of shares for liability protection purposes. I remembered signing it at our kitchen table on a Tuesday evening while Foster made dinner, barely reading past the first page because I trusted him completely and because he had told me our own attorney, not Adair, had already reviewed it. "Foster used a different attorney for that document," I said slowly, the memory sharpening as I spoke. "He said Adair was too busy that month." Adair's voice went quiet. "Ren, I want you to bring me the physical copy of that document today. I think we need to have it independently reviewed." I drove to Adair's office that morning with the document in a manila folder on my passenger seat. And by noon, a forensic document examiner Adair had worked with for years confirmed what I already suspected in my gut. The amendment I had signed 3 years earlier had quietly restructured my 49% common shares into a preferred class with severely limited voting rights, while simultaneously creating a mechanism that allowed the majority shareholder, Foster, to trigger a mandatory buyout of preferred shares at book value if the preferred shareholder, me, failed to actively participate in more than 4 board meetings within any 18-month period. I had missed 6 board meetings in the past 2 years, not because I did not care about the company, but because Foster himself had repeatedly told me my presence was not necessary anymore, that the meetings were mostly administrative, that my time was better spent on my own firm. He had, without ever saying so directly, engineered a path toward legally stripping me of my ownership stake, and my voice in a company I had helped create, all while telling me he was protecting me from unnecessary stress. "He's been building this for 3 years, I said out loud, mostly to myself, sitting in Adair's office with the document trembling slightly in my hands. Adair nodded grimly. "It looks that way. And Ren, there's something else. The forensic examiner flagged your signature on the original 2018 amendment. It's close, remarkably close, but it's not a perfect match to your verified signature on file." I felt the floor tilt beneath me in a way that had nothing to do with the document's legal implications and everything to do with a much simpler, much more devastating realization. "Are you telling me I might not have signed this at all?" Adair's face was carefully neutral in the way lawyers train themselves to be when delivering news that could shatter a person's understanding of their own memory. "I'm telling you we need a full forensic signature analysis before we know for certain. But I want you prepared for the possibility that some of what you believe you signed over the years, you may never have actually put a pen to." That afternoon, I did something I had never done in 15 years of marriage. I hired a forensic accounting firm out of Charlotte, the same firm Adair's practice had used for 2 prior corporate fraud cases, and authorized a full review of every executive document connected to my name at Ashby Meridian Partners going back 5 years. I also did something else. I called the bank and froze every joint account Foster N.D. I shared, a right explicitly protected under the original prenuptial and shareholder agreements my father had insisted upon 15 years earlier. The same protections Foster had apparently spent 3 years quietly trying to dismantle. Foster called me 11 times that afternoon. I let every call go to voicemail. At 6 p.m., he showed up at Adair's office unannounced, and the receptionist called back to tell me he was in the lobby demanding to see me. I told her to ask him to leave, and when he refused, Adair herself walked out to speak with him. I watched through the frosted glass of the conference room door as Foster's posture shifted from indignant to desperate over the course of a 2-minute conversation I could not hear. He left without seeing me. That night, he called my cell phone 43 times. I counted them the next morning, scrolling through the missed call log with a strange, hollow calm, the way you might count something that no longer has the power to hurt you the way it once did. The forensic accounting review took 11 days. I did not go into Ashby Meridian's offices during that time, on Adair's advice, because she did not want the investigation to look like a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate corporate inquiry. I stayed at my own firm, buried myself in a hospital renovation project that demanded every ounce of my attention, and let the professionals do the quiet, methodical work that Foster had apparently underestimated for years. On the 12th day, the forensic team found the pattern. It was not one altered document. It was 17 separate amendments, authorizations, and executive filings spanning nearly 4 years, each one incrementally shifting operational control and voting power away from me and toward Foster. Each one bearing a signature that the examiners now confirmed, with 94% certainty based on pressure analysis and stroke pattern comparison, had not been produced by my hand. I sat in Adair's conference room on a Thursday afternoon while the lead forensic examiner, a soft-spoken woman named Odalise Ferreira, walked me through 17 documents laid out across the table like evidence photographs at a crime scene, because in every sense that mattered, that is precisely what they were. "The pattern is consistent," Odalise said, pointing to a series of highlighted signature comparisons. "Someone studied your genuine signature closely enough to replicate the general shape, but the pressure points and the stroke order are wrong in ways that are very difficult to fake convincingly under close analysis. Whoever did this either practiced extensively or had someone else do it for them." I thought immediately of Simone Rourke, sharp, precise, unfailingly good with detail work. The young associate Foster had hired 9 years into building his company, the woman who had spent 2 years being the only person who had ever seen him. I called Simone, and I want to be honest that I almost did not make that call at all, because some part of me wanted to simply let her disappear into whatever consequences were coming for her without ever hearing her voice again. But another part of me, the part that still believed in understanding even when understanding costs something, needed to know how much she knew. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice tight and thin in a way I had never heard it during 9 years of holiday parties and office visits. "Ren," she said, "I have been hoping you would call and dreading it at the same time." I did not soften my voice for her. "Did you know about the forged documents, Simone?" A long silence stretched across the line. "I typed some of them," she finally said, and her voice broke on the last word. "Foster told me they were routine filings he needed help formalizing because you were too busy with your own firm to review every piece of paperwork personally. He said you had given him general authorization years ago." I believed him. I know that sounds impossibly naive now, but I believed him the way I believed everything he told me. I let that sit between us for a long moment. "Did you know he was married when you started sleeping with him?" I asked, because I needed to hear her answer that question specifically, separate from everything else. "Not at first," she said quietly. "He told me during our 2nd year working together that his marriage had been over in every way that mattered for a long time, that you two lived like business partners rather than spouses, that he was only staying because of the company's ownership structure and didn't want to complicate things legally. I know now that isn't true. I've known for about 2 weeks, actually, since the forensic team started asking me questions." 2 weeks. She had known for 2 weeks and continued sitting across candlelit tables from my husband anyway, and I told her so, plainly, without cruelty but without mercy either. I ended things with him. 9 days ago, she said, "I want you to believe that even though I understand you have no reason to." I did not tell her I believed her, because I did not yet know if I did. I told her only that the forensic investigation would determine what role, if any, she had played in the document fraud, and that whatever consequences followed would not be softened by an apology delivered over the phone. The following week, Adair filed for an emergency board review of Ashby Meridian Partners, citing evidence of fraudulent shareholder documentation, and requested an immediate injunction restoring my original 49% common share ownership, pending a full investigation. Foster's attorney fought it for exactly 6 hours before the judge, reviewing Odalys Ferreira's forensic report, granted a temporary restraining order, freezing all further corporate transactions, and restoring my original voting rights immediately. I remember exactly where I was when Adair called to tell me the ruling had come through, standing in my own firm's conference room, reviewing blueprints for a children's hospital wing. And I remember having to sit down abruptly in one of the drafting chairs, because my legs simply stopped cooperating with the rest of my body for a moment. The board meeting that followed, 3 days later, was the first time I had been inside Ashby Meridian's offices in over a month. I walked into the same conference room where Foster had once proudly shown investors the framed magazine article calling him Asheville's sharpest financial mind under 40. And I sat down at the head of the table, not because I demanded the seat, but because the interim board chair, an older gentleman named Whitford Blanchard, who had known my father decades earlier, gestured for me to take it without a word of debate. Foster sat 3 seats down, his tie slightly crooked, his usual polish visibly cracking at the edges. Simone was not present. She had voluntarily placed herself on unpaid leave the day the forensic report became public within the company. "Mr. Ashby," Whitford began, his voice carrying the particular gravity of a man who has run difficult meetings for 30 years. "The board has reviewed the forensic accounting report in full. Can you confirm or deny that you directed the preparation of amended shareholder documents bearing signatures that were not produced by Mrs. Ashby?" Foster's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "I want to be very clear that everything I did to protect the company's operational stability. Wren was rarely present at board meetings. Decisions needed to be made quickly, and I acted in what I believed was the best interest of Ashby Meridian." Another board member, a sharp-eyed woman named Raina Castellanos, leaned forward. "That is not an answer to the question, Foster. Did you direct the forgery of your wife's signature on 17 separate legal documents, yes or no?" The silence stretched long enough that I found myself counting my own heartbeats. "Yes," Foster finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, and something in the room seemed to exhale collectively, the relief of finally hearing a truth everyone had already suspected. The board voted unanimously that afternoon to terminate Foster as managing partner for cause, effective immediately, citing breach of fiduciary duty and fraudulent misrepresentation of shareholder consent. His severance was voided under the for-cause termination clause, the same clause I later learned with a bitter kind of irony, that Foster himself had insisted on adding to the founding documents years earlier as protection against exactly this kind of misconduct, never imagining he would be the one it eventually caught. The civil fraud claims moved forward under separate counsel, and criminal referral for forgery was formally submitted to the district attorney's office, though Adair warned me such cases often took months or years to resolve and rarely resulted in the dramatic consequences people imagine from television dramas. Still, the referral existed. The record existed. The truth, finally, existed in a form no charm or persuasion could talk its way around. Foster came to the house exactly once after the board meeting, 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday evening. I saw his car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window and considered not answering the door at all, but something in me needed this final conversation to happen face-to-face rather than through lawyers and certified letters. I opened the door but left the chain latched, the same way, I would later learn, so many women before me had done in the exact same circumstance, some instinct for boundary that needs no instruction manual. "I lost the company," he said, standing on the porch with rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. "No," I said, "you lost the illusion that a company you built with my mother's inheritance and my father's protective instincts was ever entirely yours to gamble with." He had no response to that. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said finally. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I know that means almost nothing now." I studied his face for a long moment, looking for the man I had fallen for at 22, and finding only fragments of him buried under years of accumulated deception. "Are you sorry for what you did?" I asked, "or sorry that it stopped working?" He did not answer, and in his silence, I finally got the honesty I had been waiting weeks to hear. I filed for divorce the following Monday. Because of the original prenuptial agreement my father had insisted upon, and because the forensic evidence had already established the fraudulent nature of Foster's attempts to alter our shareholder arrangement, the financial proceedings moved faster than either of our attorneys initially predicted. I retained my full 49% ownership of Ashby Meridian Partners, now restructured under new governance protections Adair, helped designed specifically to prevent any single partner, myself included, from ever again being able to quietly dismantle another shareholder's rights through paperwork buried inside routine-looking documents. The board asked me to consider stepping into an expanded operational role, given everything that had happened. And after weeks of consideration, I agreed to become interim managing partner while the search for permanent leadership continued. A role I approached not with vengeance, but with the particular clarity that comes from finally being able to see an organization you helped build without anyone else's narrative standing between you and the truth of it. Simone Rourke was never charged criminally. As the forensic investigation ultimately concluded, she had acted under Foster's direct instruction and misrepresentation rather than independent malicious intent. Though she resigned from Ashby Meridian permanently rather than wait for the board's final decision on her employment status. She sent me one final email, which I read once and did not respond to, in which she wrote that she hoped I would eventually understand she had been lied to as thoroughly as I had, just from a different angle of the same deception. I do understand that, in the quiet, unemotional way you understand facts about whether patterns or historical events, true, but no longer capable of generating much feeling in me either way. 6 months after that night at Bellemare, I stood in the newly renovated lobby of Ashby Meridian Partners, now operating under a name I had personally chosen during the restructuring Delacroix Voss Financial Group, a nod to the family whose legal diligence had ultimately saved everything Foster had tried to quietly take. We hosted a small launch event for a new initiative I had been developing in my notebooks for years, but never had the authority or the confidence to fully pursue while Foster ran the public face of the company. A mentorship fund specifically designed to help women entrepreneurs in Western North Carolina secure the kind of early capital that so rarely reaches them through traditional channels. Whitford Blanchard, still serving on the board, raised a glass that evening and said something I have thought about often since. Some people spend their careers building companies. Fewer people spend their careers building the kind of integrity that survives even when the company itself is threatened. I did not cry at the event, though I came close, because for the first time in over a year, the applause in the room felt like it belonged to something true rather than something performed. I think about that notification often, the one that popped up on my tablet while I sat alone in bed with a head cold on our 15th anniversary, dinner with my only love, 8 p.m., Bellemare. I used to think of it as the moment everything fell apart. I have come to understand it differently now. It was the moment everything finally became visible, the moment 15 years of quiet, careful erosion finally surfaced into something I could no longer excuse, explain away, or absorb into the private architecture of a marriage I had spent half my life defending, even to myself. Foster did not destroy me that night at the restaurant. He had already been trying to destroy the foundation of everything I owned for 3 years before that dinner reservation ever synced to my calendar. What that notification actually did was hand me the one thing Foster had spent 3 careful years trying to take away without my noticing: the truth, delivered at exactly 7:52 p.m., completely by accident, and entirely, finally, mine. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done the moment that notification appeared on your screen? Would you have driven to that restaurant the way I did, or handled it differently? Share your perspective in the comments below, and if you enjoy powerful stories about betrayal, resilience, and women reclaiming what was always rightfully theirs, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.